I'm Melissa Shanahan, and this is the Law Firm Owner Podcast, episode number 219. Welcome to the Law Firm Owner Podcast, powered by Velocity Work, for owners who want to grow a firm that gives them the life they want. Get crystal clear on where you're going, take planning seriously, and honor your plan like a pro. This is the work that creates velocity. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode. I had the pleasure to have a conversation recently with Jessica Gonifas. She owns Silver Peaks Accounting Services, and that does fractional CFO work for law firm owners. We had a really great conversation, and what I learned is that we think a lot alike about things, and her expertise and her background is really special for the firms that she has the opportunity to work with. I always enjoy sitting down and meeting new, especially women in this space who are full of integrity, care deeply about a customized approach for each client that she works with as a fractional CFO. I mean, the value in that is immense. And I think in this episode, we talk about this, maybe it was offline, but we share a mutual hatred for a prescriptive nature when it comes to working with law firm owners. Every business is unique. Every owner has different desires and outcomes that they are looking for. And listening to those and helping them be on the path for those is really important. So anyway, it feels like we are very aligned in many of the ways that we think. We have all the places that she lives on the internet in the show notes, so please go check her out. And I hope you enjoy this episode, this conversation with Jessica Gonifas. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode. I am thrilled to have Jessica Gonifas today on the podcast of Silver Peaks Accounting. Hi.
Hey there. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh. Welcome to the show. I am thrilled to introduce people to you and talk through something that's really common. I think a lot of people deal with, or certainly can identify with. I guess before we get into the meat of it, will you share with everyone who you are, where you are, and what you do?
Yeah, so I am a CPA and I'm in Parker, Colorado. We serve clients all over the country, so that is not limiting for us. And we have clients in most states. I've had my firm for about 5 years and we focus on law firms. So the majority of our clients are small to medium-sized law firms. And we help with the accounting and fractional CFO. So both pieces are super important that you have accurate accounting. My background is in financial reporting. So I am a stickler for accurate financials. It's a big deal for us. And I've also worked in the CFO role. So I have been able to use my experience at much larger companies to help small business have that much higher level C-suite type partnership and help them grow their firms where they want to go.
That is, I love, just in talking to you before the recording, what I have learned about you is a stickler for accuracy, which makes my heart sing. That's so great. And that through talking to you, and we'll get into this, but you and I are the same in the belief that with anything, not just finances, there is not a set blueprint that people should abide by to like their equation to success. It really does need to be looked at individually, and you care about that, which is really important. And I don't think it's done enough for, at least with the clients that we work with. I think oftentimes, even if the accountant has that same belief, they don't take the time to actually customize and get to know the client and figure out what their equation, I don't know if equation is the right word, but just for like their set path should be unique to them. Yeah, I think that's really great. So I'm pumped to have you here. It feels like it might be best to start the conversation around this idea that there tends to be a lack of confidence when it comes to the accounting side of things or the finance side of things for the business, because that's not what lawyers went to school for. And, they find themselves with their own business and they have a whole bunch of things to look at. I would love to hear what you see from that angle. And I think just kind of open up the discussion and normalize the fact that it's okay that they don't have all the answers on that side. And then we could talk about like what they need to do in order to get their answers. What's your experience with that?
Yeah, I think, I've seen a lot of things, right? So I like to equate myself on some level to a doctor, right? The doctor's got to know what the symptoms are. The doctor needs to know what the problems are. And you have to feel super comfortable with that person. So I know that accountants typically can be a little cold and maybe standoffish, is kind of how the stereotypical accountant is. And that doesn't facilitate an open dialogue, right? So when we're working with the clients, if you have a question on your financials, we want you to ask. We want to help you learn. We also like that second set of eyes, right? We're not perfect. We do make mistakes. So if something doesn't look right to you or you have a question, absolutely need to be asking. And I know that is not a philosophy of some professionals in my field. And if you feel like you can't ask, then you need to move on. Your accountant, whether it's fractional CFO or monthly accounting, needs to be your partner in helping you grow your firm. So I have heard a lot of potential clients say, well, this gal isn't great, but she was better than the last one that stole from me or totally screwed up my books. So we just kind of put up with her. Well, that's not conducive to growing your law firm, right? So you need to find somebody that you fit with. And, we have a call. It's a 15-minute call to see if you're even a fit with us. So I have to fit with you as well because we have a ongoing partnership. So I need to make sure that you're the kind of person that I'm going to like working with. I want you to enjoy getting on the calls with me and look forward to talking about your finances and look forward to getting the financials every month. And that is possible. I just think that so many people are in this rut with their accounting staff where they just put up with it, or even in some cases, they just do it themselves because they can't trust anybody else. And there's definitely better options out there for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And you brought up a point too, also before recording, that sometimes just because of our ego or whatever, we don't want to ask certain questions. We want to just kind of roll along with what we see. I'm like, oh, yep. Okay. Okay. And getting to the place where you're willing to ask a question and maybe sound dumb, but you just you just want to understand. It's important. And it does take the right relationship to feel like it's safe enough to ask questions that you quote unquote should know the answers to, which I don't think that's true, that you should know the answers to these things. You are like, we haven't been trained in these things. Right. And so I hear what you're saying. If it's not a good fit with the accountant, where the person feels comfortable enough to dig in and be educated in ways that they haven't prior. Yeah, super important. You mentioned this, and several episodes ago, I had a client on the podcast, and she's also an accountant. And we were actually talking about one specific thing when it comes to advanced client costs and how they're handled, and it's handled poorly. And so we went into that, but we started talking about the relationship with your accountant and how important it is to have someone great on your side and how often people don't. Sometimes they're doing it on their own if they're early enough and they
Yeah.
carry that over a little too far. And
Yeah.
sometimes they have someone, but the relationship feels pretty sterile.
Yeah.
So one question I have for you is, when, and maybe it's before when the business is being set up, but in your opinion, when should someone find that right partner? How early when they start their firm?
I say right away. I know it's when we're starting our businesses, and I've been in the same thing. I built this from nothing. We want to bootstrap things, and, we're just focused on replacing our salary, right? So we can feed our family. So that cost may seem like unnecessary at the beginning. And I've heard people say, well, how hard is it? It's just QuickBooks Online. Well, it is kind of difficult. It's not the day to day, it's the bigger things like advanced client costs, right? Or the trust fund. Oh my gosh, we could do an entire episode on the trust fund.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, we had one client that I think they were probably around 3 million a year in revenue, and they'd never really had a good accountant, and they'd probably been six or 7 years. And it was a mess. It was really a huge mess. And, they were trying, they had some different people, but it didn't work. And they paid us, tens of thousands of dollars to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a scenario that you can get yourself into if you're not aggressive enough and assertive enough to find the right person. I don't have a crystal ball. If you give me your books and they're a mess, it's not like I just wave my magic wand and I get it figured out in a month. But your person needs to be making progress and you need to feel comfortable with that progress. And in the case I just mentioned, they had a lot of red flags for several months, but they just kind of let it keep going. So I say from the beginning, it's an overhead cost rate that we just don't love to have in our business. But in the long run, it's going to get you so much further along. And if you're not in the beginning and you're like, this isn't right, my trust account, I know I don't feel good about this. I don't feel good about some things. You've got to make a change. So every single potential new client call that I've had that has told me, I feel like something's not right with my books, but I can't put my finger on it. They're right. Like their gut is telling them something and they need to listen to it. And if you ignore it for too long, you're going to have yourself in a massive issue.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. You're talking about that $3 million firm that like you had to clean everything up. It's crazy how successful, I'm putting air quotes around successful, how much money you can make and be a hot mess. I think I always thought like naive former Melissa used to think that, well, if you're making that much, you've got your ducks in a row. And that is just not the case.
Well,
some
in
of the
that
time.
case, and this has happened before too, with other clients, I'll have folks come to me looking for fractional CFO. So they'll realize, hey, I'm at, 2 million a year and I'm kind of stuck and I need help getting past that. And I know I need to understand my numbers better. Or I hear this one almost all the time is my advertising expenses are too high. I don't know what everyone's spending all this money on. So a lot of times they come to us for the CFO side and more of that strategic financial partnership. And the first thing I do, of course, is look at the books because as the fractional CFO, it's my responsibility to ensure the books are accurate. And those are some uncomfortable meetings. Hey, this is not working. This is a mess. We can't even do anything until we get the books straightened out. So a lot of times they're like, well, yeah, I kind of had some issues or I wasn't really sure. And so, there's no problem that we can't solve either.
Yeah. 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 Which is so great. I think I love that about numbers. Like you can always get to the truth.
Right. I know. It might take a while.
Yeah, exactly. So it struck me, I have heard you talk about a lack of confidence that people, it's easy to have a lack of confidence in this area. And it's easy to make money and still have that sort of be a gray area. And so I think it can be tough to pull people's attention enough to say, okay, I'm going to go deal with this because they're growing, they're getting busier. And there's this thing over here, their finances that they're not totally clear about. But the one thing that I wrote down as you and I were talking prior about this lack of clarity is because there's oftentimes a fear of digging in, a fear of maybe what they'll find, a fear that it's going to be a mess, a fear that it's going to take a lot longer and suck bandwidth that they don't have, a fear of who they choose because they don't know a good partner. It's like all these barriers are barriers. But what I wrote down was it has to start with a decision to get clear. And if they just make the decision, then it's one foot in front of the next and they can talk to different professionals. And I think that you should be at the top of people's list to talk to just to start to educate themselves and create clarity. Not that they have to be the ones to fix it all. I don't know if you have anything anecdotal or if you just have anything to offer that, because maybe what you say is enough to pull someone out of that just driving forward state to get them to say, all right, wait a minute, let's go.
There's nothing I haven't seen. So whether it's, $2 million sitting in the checking account and they're too scared to hire another person or take distribution or whatever. I mean, I've seen that side of it. I've also seen the side where they're using personal credit cards to pay for my expenses. So, or maybe their firm is doing great, but they have 100 grand of student loans and that keeps them up at night, but they don't really know how to balance taking extra money out of the firm to pay for that. Maybe they don't have cash reserves. Maybe they had a massive cash crunch last fall and they don't want that to happen again. There's nothing I haven't seen in business. My own father had a small business when I was in college that failed and just was the most devastating thing to ever see anybody go through. So I've even personally seen that side of it in my family. And I mean, I do think of my clients as family. So when you come to me, I need to know. I need to know what's happening. I need to know what's keeping me up at night. And we actually talk about that on our first call because I need to know if I can help you. And I think part of it is just verbalizing it to somebody that, has seen this before probably, or is not going to be judgmental. That's just how I am. I've had some crappy things happen in my life, some crappy things with money, crappy things with husbands, all of the things. So to me, it doesn't matter what it is, we're going to work through it. And I have a video, a testimonial with a client, and I didn't ask her to say this, but she said, hey, one of the things on your first call was I really felt like you weren't judgmental. And honestly, she really wasn't in a bad place. And she said, if I would have felt like that, I wouldn't have hired you. And so that was kind of some actual validation because that is how I try to show up for folks. And really at the end of the day, we're future focused. Mm-hmm. So what are the issues? What are the problems? What's keeping you up at night? But we're going to focus on the future and we're going to get rid of that and we're going to fix it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So unlike a lot of accountants traditionally are very historically focused, right? That's just how we are. That's how we're trained. That's what our makeup is. I tend to be very future focused. And that's part of the reason I excelled in the CFO role when I was a CFO was I need to know the history, right? I need to know the numbers. I want to see a couple of years of historical numbers so I can sort through the story of what the numbers are telling us. But that's only part of it, right? Like you as a client know where you wanted to go, what happened. And then, of course, the future focus is what's your vision for your firm and your life. And we're going to make the numbers work for you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess, so I'm thinking of listeners right now. If someone finds themselves in a spot where maybe they're super successful in terms of revenue, but they don't have a lot of answers for what's going on the financial side, like what's the smallest step they can take to just get themselves on a path that's going to create a lot of clarity? And maybe that's just decide to make a phone call.
I think it's, of course I'd love to chat with them, but ask for recommendations or whatever, find a couple of folks to chat with.
Yep.
I think most of us do kind of introductory calls. I do an hour. We kind of have a process where you meet with one of our team for about 15 minutes to do some very initial screening. And then you meet with me for an hour and I just ask you questions the whole hour. And I've had some folks leave just that hour and they didn't pay me anything. And we just talked saying, wow, I already understand better what my problems are and where I need to go. Now I need your help to fix them. But I ask what your vision is for your firm. And that's a discussion that most people have never even had or even thought of. Right? And so what's the vision and how are we going to structure the firm finances to help you accomplish that?
Yeah, totally. You mentioned when people come out of law school or when they start their firm, they can find themselves floundering with the finance side. And I was asking you, why do you think they flounder? Like, what is that? And really, it kind of came back to the same thing. Like, they know that there's issues. They feel stress on that side. They also don't have the answers. And so that's what can cause that. And one thing you mentioned was that they really don't have any systems in place because it's not their training. And so I think that's a word that probably brings comfort is that, yes, they have you as a trusted person, but just understanding that a trusted person should implement or institute systems that will serve them and where they want to go towards their vision, all of that. I don't know if you want to say anything about what that looks like or give people a picture of an idea of what that means.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of emotional baggage surrounding money and history of something our dad said to us or our grandpa or whatever, and we bring all of that baggage into our business and it's very emotional. There's a lot of emotions tied to money. And money can mean a lot of things in our society. It can mean success or lack of success. And it's hard for that not to get wrapped up in your business, right? So we do talk about revenue a lot, and revenue is important, but revenue is a sexy number, right? I don't care how much you're making if you have no profit. But if you don't know if you have any profit, then you've got a whole other problem, right? So you can go to all the bar association dinners and talk about your $5 million firm, but if you have no profit, then you have a problem. But I think it's the systems that help take the emotions out for us. And when we talk about a financial system, I'm not talking about QuickBooks or an accounting software. I'm talking about what you do with the money outside of the accounting function, right? So one of the things that new firm owners struggle with, and probably half my calls, I get this, I had to pay a bunch of taxes and I had no idea I had to pay that much. So we have a system where we suggest you set aside a percentage of your profit every month in a separate account that you don't even touch, right? And then your taxes are no big deal. That's a system to help you have less stress surrounding money, because we all have the tax person calling in April because we're small business and most of our taxes don't come out of our paycheck. So we have to have a system in place to take that fear and that stress out. And that impacts how you show up for your clients and your potential clients and your family and your staff. If you have that hanging over you, I can guarantee you 100% it's impacting the way you're showing up in your business and all other areas.
Yep. I have a couple random questions that, we'll see if you have an opinion. I'm sure you probably do. Is there ever a reason to not pay payroll twice a month and instead do every other week? Like, I know that people can do either, but is there a reason that you would not just do twice a month?
It's just preference. Our clients are probably half and half because we do payroll too. It's really just a preference on the way that they've set it up. Now, for me, for budgeting purposes, I like it twice a month. It does kind of screw up your financials twice a year. You have those 3 pay periods, and it is easier for benefit calculations and that stuff. But at the end of the day, you're paying them the same amount.
Right. But it just seems easier and more straightforward on the back end if it's twice a month. Is that true?
It is. Yeah. I just think that I don't know when at some point people did the biweekly thing and it just kind of is but it's like half and half. If you were brand new to me and said, hey, I want to do payroll, when should I do it? I would say do it on the 15th on the last day of the month.
Yep. Yeah, that's what I was
talking about. Employees, I know some employees like the third paychecks because they considered a little bit of a bonus for themselves, with their financial planning and stuff. But yeah.
Yep. Okay. I was curious if you had, because I cannot find a good reason for 3 times a month. If it's that way and it's not an issue, but
theory, from a cash flow perspective, you're paying a little bit less every 2 weeks. And then you kind of get that catch up on that third payroll when that hits. So maybe that could be a reason, but at the end of the day, you're paying the same thing anyway.
Yeah.
So
yeah, cash flow. I think there's certain times, hopefully it's just not really an issue if that were to happen, but there's certain times that for whatever reason, if people are in cash crunches and then it happens to be in what was June this year, it's like, it's stressful. And they didn't make the decision for every other week. At some point, somehow that decision was made and they didn't do it consciously. So I was curious. Okay. And then the other thing I was going to ask, I hear people ask this a lot. I hear them ask their accountants. I hear them ask me, and I don't have a straight answer. I can tell you the answer I give, which doesn't feel helpful oftentimes to them. But when it comes to profit margin, it depends on the firm. It depends on a lot of things, like are they virtual? Are they not virtual? That kind of a thing. But what would you say is a healthy range for profit margin for a typical firm, which I don't even know, that feels like terrible language to use. But what do you have to say about that? Or maybe you can fix my question to be something that's easier to answer.
Yeah. So basically, from a general business perspective, a 25% profit margin is healthy. And so as a business owner, a small business owner, and this gets a little wacko because we're not corporations like Apple or whatever, but you should be making a wage that is close to what you would be making if you were doing this somewhere else. And you should be getting a return on your equity. So where the return on equity comes from is in that profit piece. So if you're S Corp election, which most people are, you should be taking a wage. And then the return on equity comes from the profit margin. So to have a healthy business, it should be around 25%. 15 is kind of a minimum for a business that you know is going to be around in several years, but the 25 is good. That's what we work with on our clients. We don't just say, you're not at 25 or 35. We got to cut costs. We want to have a strategy. And sometimes there's a strategy that maybe we're building staff this year and our profit margin may be a little bit lower this year because we're building some of that infrastructure and that foundation around staffing. And we know maybe we're hiring 3 brand new attorneys and they're not going to be billing at 3 or 4 times their salary. But that's a strategic decision that you made, and we know what that's going to do to the numbers before you make that decision. So most of our clients are in the 30s, and that's a wide range of different types of practice areas. You know, we do have one client that he was fine at 10 or 15 because he wanted to be overstaffed. He didn't want his staff stressed out, and he wanted to really deliver white glove service to his clients and have those attorneys available when they needed to be. But that was a strategic decision he made, and that's how he wanted to run his firm.
Yeah. And then just for kicks and giggles, of all your clients, what's the highest profit margin someone has?
I have one at 45.
Okay. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay. I figured people would be curious about that. Since you mentioned expenses, you said something before that we pushed record, which was you have to help people sometimes understand that they have to stop obsessing over expenses and focus on revenue. And I loved that because I think people get in a rut with thinking and sort of constricting down. And while you mentioned it's important to always watch the expenses, of course, but the focus needs to be on generating business and generating revenue.
Absolutely. So we look at the expenses. I have some benchmarks on some overhead and those things. We look at how you're fitting in with that. Then we talk about strategy and we talk about changes that you may want to make. So the 2 that I hear from pretty much every client are advertising and office supplies. So we look at some strategies to make sure those costs are reasonable and we set a budget, right? So if you have a marketing person that's in charge of your marketing program and you're like, I don't know what they're spending all this money on. Well, we set a budget and they have to stick in the budget. And we could talk about tracking, marketing effectiveness and all of that stuff. But basically, it's setting that budget and setting that fence. And again, that's a process that you need to have in a system in place that if your advertising person's under budget, then you need to be checking how effective that advertising is, and then we'll make modifications. But generally speaking, we set the budget, we look at the strategy on the expense side, and then you need to move on. You need to check it every month, make sure you're in budget. But as the owner and the CEO and the rainmaker of your law firm, you need to be obsessed over the revenue side. The expenses will happen, and that's part of what our clients have me for, is I'm watching them also, alerting you to any red flags. But at the end of the day, if that's the focus, and I've seen it happen, I had a client, he was obsessed on the expenses. It was cutting every single penny that he could cut. We talked about it every single month, and his firm didn't grow at all. Like, even though he was working on the revenue, he said he was obsessed with the expense side, and it just stunted his growth.
I mean, it's almost like it's where your focus is going to produce.
It's money mindset,
yes.
Right? So are you focused on scarcity or abundance?
Yep.
Focusing on the expenses is scarcity. Focusing on revenue is abundance.
Yeah, absolutely. That is great. Man, okay. Well, we should have you back if you're willing. We could just dig into topics. Like you mentioned, we could do a whole episode on trust accounting. I think that would be super cool. I don't hear podcast episodes out there specifically to do with that. And I think that's a topic many people would be interested in hearing what someone like you has to say. So yeah, if
It's a
you'll
big
have us
deal.
come
And
back on
that's
the
a
show.
big sort of little nagging thing that a lot of clients have is I don't really know my trust.
Yes.
I know it isn't right, or I'm not confident. And again, it's just all about systems.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you for coming on. This is a good
Yay.
intro. I feel like it would be great to have you on more.
Awesome. I'd love to come back.
Hey, you may not know this, but there's a free guide for a process I teach called Monday Map, Friday Wrap. If you go to velocitywork.com, it's all yours. It's about how to plan your time and honor your plans so that week over week, more work that moves the needle is getting done in less time. Go to velocitywork.com to get your free copy. Thank you for listening to the Law Firm Owner Podcast. If you're ready to get clearer on your vision, data, and mindset, then head over to velocitywork.com where you can plug in to quarterly strategic planning with accountability and coaching in between. This is the work that creates velocity.